Hey everyone, my name is Kain. I'm the founder of Synthetix and the co-founder of Infinex. Infinex is a new front end for DeFi perps that's powered by Synthetix. So let's have a look at why it's time to take on centralized exchanges. So we're almost a decade and a half into this crypto experiment. And yet we kind of have this dirty little secret, which is that in spite of all the amazing decentralized permissionless technology that we built, we are still operating in centralized databases. So we still have custody that's being handed over to centralized entities. We still have OTC desks that are operating out of Telegram groups. There's all of this stuff that's happening that is not actually leveraging the technology that we built. The majority of the activity is happening in centralized exchanges and databases. And this is it's a little bit ironic, it's a little bit sad, it's a little bit insane that we haven't been able to solve this problem. We've been working very hard on it. So within DeFi, we spent the last 5 years building infrastructure. But I think we're finally at a point now where we are ready to kind of transition from building out infrastructure to actually taking on these exchanges and trying to improve the status quo, which is this situation where, again, unfortunately, we're handing over custody in order to get usability. So we need to dismantle the centralized exchanges, and I think that it's a bear market, as we can sort of see around here, and so now's the time to do it so that we're in a position by the time we get into the next cycle where new users who are coming in are going to come in and use decentralized technology to interact with decentralized technology rather than using centralized technology to interact with it. So the attack vector here, I think, is for DeFi really perps, right? So the perps markets have grown significantly over the last 3 to 4 years. Obviously, FTX did a very good job of using perps to generate new activity, generate new users, right up until the point where everyone got rugged. But if we look at the state of the perps market, this is just Binance, right? This is not all of the other centralized exchanges. Just in Binance alone, it's like 25 times larger than all of the DEXs, which, we're just not quite there, right? In spite of the fact that we have really good exchanges like DYDX, GMX, Synthetix, we're still not getting any volume. So that's been this sort of question that's been plaguing me over the last year is if we're kind of at feature parity with centralized exchanges, why don't we have the volume? Why don't we have the users? What's missing? And I think what's missing is that centralized exchanges have had a huge advantage this entire time for the last 15 years over decentralized technology. So the first thing is that when new users come into the space, they're sort of put into this fork, right, where they can go down the decentralized pathway where you have to have a Trezor or a Ledger or MetaMask, seed phrases, etc. All of this new sort of user flow that they're unfamiliar with. Or they can go to Binance and put in a username, password, email, and be signed up in 5 minutes. And it's very Web 2 flow. It feels easy. It's simple. And that's why when we get into a bull market, 95 to 98% of users flow through into these centralized exchanges and not into DeFi. Eventually, some of them kind of get DeFi pilled and crypto pilled, and they will move out of centralized exchanges, but the vast majority stay in centralized exchanges. The other thing is that centralized exchanges have much better security controls. So there's all kinds of things that you can do with MFA. You can have multiple accounts. You can have sub-accounts. There's a bunch of different things that both sophisticated users and retail users really like. Whereas with DeFi and with crypto, you kind of have one thing. You have a seed phrase or you have a hardware wallet, and that's it. The third thing is account recovery. So in DeFi, it's basically you have your funds on a hardware wallet or in MetaMask, and if you get phished or if you lose your hardware wallet or you lose your seed phrase, gone. It's game over. Whereas in a centralized exchange, you can recover your account via your email. Or, absolute worst case, you lose your email, lose your phone number, lose everything. You can still turn up, get on to a chat with someone on a centralized exchange support desk, give them your passport or whatever, and have your funds recovered. Right? So it's actually much harder for you to lose your funds in a centralized exchange than it is in DeFi. The problem is it's much easier for the centralized exchange to lose your funds when you're in a centralized exchange. That's the trade-off that you're making, right? And then the final thing is when you're interacting with a database, when you're interacting with something that's using Web 2 tech, it's much smoother, much faster. It feels like you're inside the app. It feels like it's very interactive, and it just feels like a better user experience. When you use a lot of dApps, even if they're on an L2 where the latency is a little bit lower, they still feel like these kind of static things. They don't feel quite as interactive as you have when you're using a centralized exchange, which again is fixable, right? This is not something that we have to be stuck with. So the best example I think that we have right now in DeFi perps is DYDX. DYDX made a decision a couple of years ago to not necessarily centralize things, but to basically add some convenience, right? To make things a little bit easier for users and not go down this like pure DeFi route. So they've got off-chain order books. They've got a better onboarding experience. They don't force you to bridge. There's a whole bunch of things they're doing, and for that reason, I think they're dominating the DEX landscape in terms of perps. They're doing a lot more volume than almost all the other perps exchanges, and it really just comes down to usability. The liquidity isn't better. The interface isn't better. It's just the onboarding process and the user experience. So how do we compete with centralized exchanges? What do DEXs need to do? We've got all of these things which I guess are kind of table stakes, right? On the left-hand side, the onboarding process, multi-chain deposits, instant interactions. These are all things that centralized exchanges have as kind of a base layer that if we don't have, we're never going to compete with them. And then you've got a bunch of security options, which, again, if we don't have the ability to replicate that functionality, then we're going to struggle to onboard new users as well, right? So things like account recovery, withdrawal passwords, withdrawal delays, things that stop users from getting rugged or losing their funds. But we actually have 3 secret ingredients in DeFi that centralized exchanges cannot replicate. Self-custody. So self-custody is amazing, but it comes with some trade-offs. But the nice thing about self-custody is you cannot get rugged like we did with FTX or with Mt. Gox or with any number of exchanges over the last 15 years. So self-custody is critical, but it has to be done right. The second thing is transparency. On-chain smart contracts allow people to come in and inspect how the system will behave. So it's easy for a centralized exchange to say, yeah, no problem. Like if you have an issue, we can recover your account. But there's no way to know how that recovery works, under what conditions it does work and doesn't work. It's purely reliant on the centralized exchange, this black box, telling you how your funds will be stored, how your funds will be secured, how your funds will be released, what could happen for them to be lost. There's no way you can actually inspect that. Whereas in DeFi, you can actually come in and see, okay, here's the flow. I can see the contracts. I can see where the funds are stored on chain. I can see what happens if this case happens, and you can go through the entire flow and you can inspect it, which gives you a level of sort of transparency and oversight over the system that you just cannot get with a centralized exchange. The third thing is composability. And composability, I think, is probably the secret sauce of DeFi. It's the thing that DeFi will be able to use to significantly exceed the functionality on centralized exchanges. The problem is that composability itself is not enough, right? You can have amazing composable solutions, but if 95% of users can't interact with them because the onboarding process is really clunky, then the composability doesn't really help you. And so we need to combine all of these things and then leverage the benefits of DeFi in order to be able to take on the centralized exchanges. This is what Infinex is doing. Infinex has started with an assumption that the key thing we need to do is make the onboarding flow, make the usability and the user experience the primary thing. That is the number one thing for Infinex. So if there's something that we can do to replicate a centralized exchange experience, if there's some compromise we need to make, we will make it. And the reason why Infinex can do that is because we have pure DEXs. We have Quenta, we have Polynomial. These are pure DEXs that run on the Synthetix liquidity engine that if that's what you want, you can go and use them. And so what we've said is for the pure degen DeFi user, go use Quenta, go use Polynomial. For the average retail user, come and use Infinex because we are going to replicate that centralized exchange experience for you. And that is going to be the way that we're going to onboard all of these new users who come into the ecosystem over the next 12 to 18 months. And this is, I guess, kind of the fundamental problem, right, that we've had for a really long time, is when you come into the space, you have a binary choice. You can go pure self-custody and all of the challenges that come with that, potentially losing your own funds, losing your seed phrase, losing your hardware wallet, getting phished, deleting your MetaMask accidentally, throwing your computer into the dump and having all your Bitcoins lost for 10 years, or there's just a million stories of how that can go wrong, right? So most people don't choose that. So what happens? They go straight into a database. That's the decision. It's binary. You go into a database or you have pure self-custody, and both of those things have problems. What we're saying with Infinex is actually there is a gradient here. We can create a gradient where we can allow new users to come in and start with all the convenience measures, and then over time, if they want more self-custody, if they want to take more control as they learn the benefits of self-custody, they can actually start to remove those convenience measures. And they can even get to a point where essentially they can control the funds themselves using their own hardware wallet or their own seed phrase, and they don't need to give Infinex any control at all. So that's the big sort of innovation that we've tried to approach this from, is to say this is not a binary decision, this is a gradient, and there are a whole bunch of things that we can do to make things easier for users. So self-custody. The problem with self-custody is, as I said, that you can rug yourself. Right? It's great. You can't get rugged, but it's really easy to rug yourself, right? And there's all kinds of ways that you can do that. And so what we've said with Infinex is that we're going to give you self-custody, but we're also going to give you account recovery, so that we make it much harder for you to lose your own funds. And this is something that requires some trade-offs. It's not going to be a pure DEX experience. It's going to be an experience where Infinex has some control over your funds, and you have to kind of accept that. But we think that the majority of users will be happy for that trade-off. And there have been other people in space like Argent who've tried this, but I think the key thing is you need the functionality for people to want to use it, and then you need to give them the convenience on top of it. If you just give them the convenience, there's not really much reason for them to choose this. The second thing is transparency. As I said, all of these systems run on open source code, run on smart contracts, all of the funds are stored on chain. Anyone can come in and audit it, inspect it. It's not a black box, right? And that transparency is critical for users to feel secure that their funds are not going to be lost. And then the third thing, composability. So this is, I think, the real advantage that we have in DeFi that we haven't been able to leverage yet, but we are going to leverage it, which is that if you're a centralized exchange and you want to build some new functionality, you need to build a bespoke system. So if you want to do staking, you need to spend a year and a half building some new staking interface. It's going to be proprietary. It's going to be a black box. And you can't leverage anything that anyone else has built. Whereas in DeFi, we've got multiple different liquid staking solutions. We've got Lido, we've got Rocket Pool, we've got Swell, we've got all kinds of solutions for staking. And so if we have a system where there are a ton of users who've been onboarded because of this easy flow, any new functionality that is added, we can add. We just integrate it. So we can integrate liquid staking very easily into Infinex. But the more important thing, I think, is for new, weird things like friend tech. So friend tech is this weird social bonding curve experiment that's going on at the moment, and people are really excited about it. And if you are a centralized exchange, you're kind of locked out from that. There's really, it's very hard for you to integrate that into your centralized exchange. But for a DeFi app, it's very easy. The contracts are there, they're open source, you can go and connect them, and people can start using it very, very quickly. So the question is, why now? And really, for me, this, again, happened over the last 6 months. I think we got to a point in DeFi where we have the infrastructure. The infrastructure is finally in place now, and the missing component is the usability. So we've built lending protocols, we've built derivatives protocols, we've built DEXs, we've built spot trading, we've built all of this infrastructure, but we've really made it inaccessible to the majority of people. And so now, finally, over the last, kind of 3 to 6 months, I think we're in a position where if we can integrate all of this stuff and give people an easy onboarding flow where they can't rug themselves, we can combine all of that into something that will allow us to dismantle the centralized exchanges, which is what we need to do this cycle. We cannot have another cycle where an FTX or some other exchange dominates and then rugs everyone, commits fraud. We need to stop this problem. We need DEXs to be the thing that dominates this next cycle. I don't know what happens when you scan that, but it could be interesting, so go nuts. Thank you.